And call this meeting to order. We'd like to recognize that this meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Lillooet Nation. I'd like a motion to approve the agenda, please. Moved by Jenna, second by Jen. All in favour? Motion carries. We do not have a closed meeting. Wouldn't be any rising before then, would there? No. Good. Motion to for the consent agenda, please. Moved by Jenna, seconded by Viv. Any questions, discussion? No, all in favour? Motion carries. That's that. No business. I don't have any business arising from the minutes. Does anybody have? Vivian.
Thank you, Chair Rainbow. I just wanted to confirm every other week I've got the meeting dates written down, but we're missing August, we're missing September. So we are having a meeting on October 1st and December 3rd then. Do I have those days right?
I'm correct.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sorry, what was that? That's
Correct.
Correct. Okay. So, number 7, new business, direction request, SLRD communications policy review and update. Patricia, good morning.
Good morning. Hey everyone. Patricia Westerholm, Director of Communications and Engagement at the Squamish-Lillooet District. And I am here today with the direction request regarding the review and potential update of policy number 1.11, the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District Communications Policy. There's no presentation with this report, but I'll speak to it briefly and then of course answer any questions that may arise. So the policy was approved by the board in 2003 and subsequently amended in 2006 and 2014. So it's been more than a decade since any revisions have been made to the policy. And since that time, the board has invested in the communications department at the SLRD with staff. And we've also added some systems, technology and software that has evolved our processes. And so we're seeking direction from the committee today on how best to proceed or not with a review of the communications policy. There's an opportunity for a modest review of the policy to look at the language and update that to make sure that it reflects more accurately some of the systems and the policies or the procedures that we follow today, and just modernize some of the language that is a little bit outdated. But of course, there's also an opportunity to look at doing a more fulsome review and fully engaging with the board to consider the purpose and full scope of the policy to ensure that it's relevant not only in 2025, but in future years as well. The policy contains several items that are procedural in nature as well. And reviewing the policy now is timely in that it aligns with other work that the SLRD is doing, including the procedure bylaw review project as well. This work with regard to the communication policy has not been directed by the board at this time. With either approach, whether it's a simple review to update some of the language or a more fulsome review and update will require staff time, and the project will be led by the communications department. And of course, a more fulsome review would just require more time to undertake the project and report back on that. So happy to answer any questions that any of you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? Jenna and then Jen. Sorry, then Viv.
Thanks for the presentation. Thanks through the chair. You mentioned, Ms. Westerholm, that there's a number of pieces in the existing policy that are kind of operational in nature or more procedural, I guess is probably a better word. Is the intent that we'll take those out given the update to the procedure bylaw, or do we intend to still keep them in this document?
That's a really good question. And I think we would be working closely with the Legislative and Corporate Services Department. That project is further in its process, as I'm sure you are aware. So there'll be some collaboration internally, for sure, and some of that direction would come, from the board if we were choosing to do a more fulsome review. So we would be seeking to engage with the board to get some direction on that, some input on those pieces.
Okay, and then just in your report, I was a little bit confused. So, on page 2, it says that there are 2 options. One, that staff conduct a thorough review, and that's identified as the preferred option. And then option 2 is staff conduct a minor review. And then the more detailed components of that afterwards suggest that option 1 would actually be quicker, it would be done in April, and option 2 would be done in July.
Right.
Is that in?
That is, just an error in the,
Totally. Okay.
yeah. It should be reversed, that the more fulsome review would just take a little bit longer.
And can I just clarify, that is still the preferred approach?
The more fulsome review is
The more
the
fulsome review. Okay,
preferred
thank
approach.
you for the clarity.
Yes.
That makes thanks.
So if we just change those 2 months and just flip flop the months, that would be more accurate. Is that what you're suggesting? The option number 1 would be
Yes,
done in July.
so it's, yeah,
Okay, I had that highlighted as well. Very good. Viv?
Thank you, and that actually covers a couple of my questions. Thank you, Jenna. Are we going to start looking at this policy like right at the beginning? It refers to the purpose of the policy to develop information channels to enhance the communication with internal and external customer in the singular. And I think, well, I don't like that word in there at all, and it should be plural. Can we just make it is to enhance the internal and external communication? Is that the kind of feedback you want here at this meeting today? Or am I too much in the weeds? And I was very interested in the answer about the procedure. The procedures are not really meant to be in here, but you're going to be working with the other work that's going on to not be duplicating or contradicting. Anyway, maybe just answer that initial question about, do you want that sort of feedback now?
sure. So thank you through the chair. That's the direction we're looking for today, is whether staff undertake a minor review of the policy, which would be looking for those, the singular to put that kind of thing, and modernizing some of the language to more accurately reflect how the technology in particular that we utilize today. If the direction is to do the more fulsome review, then we would engage with the board, likely a similar, but not as involved, process that the board went through with the procedure bylaw work, where the board was surveyed. And so it'd be, if the option is to go with a more fulsome review, we would be engaging with the board for feedback.
Okay,
Your preferred option is the more fulsome review. Good, okay.
okay, I'm good with that. Thank you.
We have Chris with us. I see a little hand there.
Yes.
I can't see you, Chris, but go ahead. I can hear
Yeah,
you.
thanks. Okay, great. One thing, I think
Um, Chris, let me stop you there for a minute. You're completely breaking up. We didn't hear that question at all.
question to the rest of the committee, but I've been increasingly struggling with our use of some of the major, just given the increasing level of okay. If you can go to someone else, I'll try again.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I'd made a note myself about the term customer, which really jars with me. I don't think that's, you know, it's like going to a store and people coming to us, they don't have a choice. We're a monopoly, if you like. And I just don't see them as customers. So I'd like to come up with some different terminology there. I don't know what other people think about that, but Jenna, and then Viv, and I'm waiting, I'm looking for Chris here again, but I don't see him yet. Okay, Jenna, go ahead.
Thanks. I will just generally agree with the statement that I think the reference to customers is perhaps a little bit outdated and was an approach to communications that was maybe one style. And I think we've evolved in our relationship with our citizens and the folks that we serve. And so I think we can definitely update that language. My question was going to be around process, and appreciate staff's preferred approach of making a more fulsome review of this policy. I do think it is time. I am curious about the suggestion of engaging the full board versus using this committee. And maybe that's more of a question to committee members, and staff may have some input here, but given how much is going through the board already, we struck this committee, I think, specifically to kind of work through and hash through some of the hard pieces like communications policies, and these have been identified as priorities. And so I wonder if we can do that as a committee structure and make a recommendation to the board, as opposed to using full board time on this. So that was just a question to perhaps first to staff if they have any reflections, and or to my committee members.
Thank you. I'm sorry, who did I have next? Vivian?
Thank you. And I do prefer to be called Vivian. Thank you, Tony Rainbow. I completely agree with Jenna. Just put Jenna first. If we put our hands up at the same time, just let her go first. That was yeah, the committee should do the work and then make some recommendations to the board. That makes sense to me. Of course,
Thank
staff
you.
will wind up doing most of the work, as it should be. Chris is here. I'll be quiet.
I wonder if I should say Chris or Christopher now, but anyway, Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, Chris is fine. It's shorter. And I agree with Director Stoner's sentiments. I think the one piece I was wanting to add to, and I'm not sure if this scores it in more of a wholesome or a briefer review, but I'm increasingly struggling with our reliance on Facebook and some of the for-profit communication channels, which to me are increasingly sources of misinformation, I should say, where Canadian media has been banned, and I have some discomfort with sort of encouraging people to be on these platforms. And I wonder if it's an opportunity to make a shift, to teach people that our website is actually the best place to go for information, or maybe there are alternatives. But just with everything that's happening, that's an area where I wonder if some change in direction might be worthwhile.
Thank you.
You're here.
Any other comments or questions? Jenna?
Can we just reflect that this policy is so dated that it doesn't actually reference social media? And so we've like skipped the whole generation where we might just like be off the hook. I was impressed by that.
Okay. Patricia, do you have a sense of where what the committee would like you to do? I think we need a resolution to provide some direction. Do you have any questions for us?
Just a point, I should note that we do have a separate social media policy that was developed following the communications policy. So if the committee wishes, part of that fulsome review could be to look at both policies in tandem. and perhaps social media as a mechanism of communicating could be incorporated into, which is not reflected in this report, but just given the comments that have been shared by the committee. Perhaps that becomes another function that we review, that we incorporate into the policy as opposed to it standing on its own. Is an option.
Okay, thank you. Jen?
Thank you. And I agree with my colleagues on everything that's been said so far. I was going to say that the social media policy, I think it needs to be integrated into this policy because they're not siloed. And because of the interest and frankly, dependence upon social media as a source of communication for so many of our small rural communities, as we saw during many of the disasters we've faced over the last several years, they have to be one. I believe they're one and the same. They shouldn't be two separate policies. And I believe that our objective as a board has been to simplify and streamline so many of the pieces of work that our staff are doing to align everything. So I would like to see them brought into one, repeal one, and bring them in together. Thanks.
Jenna?
If folks are ready, I'm happy to make a motion that the committee direct staff to conduct a thorough review of policy 1.11, as well as the social media policy, including a fulsome review of the policy purpose and scope.
I'll second that and bring back to this committee, Jenna.
Yes.
Okay.
Did that necessarily say that we've merged the two policies?
Yeah, I included both this policy and the social media policy.
Okay. Everybody clear on what the motion is, or would you like Angela to read it to you? Maybe we should do that. Could you just read it out to me, please?
Yeah, so the recommendation to the board will be that staff conduct a thorough review of the communications policy 1.11 and the social media policy. That number wouldn't be included there, including the policy purpose, scope, and bring to a future policy development and review committee for further review or feedback.
Sure. Vivian?
Chair Rainbow, sorry, I really apologize. The phone was ringing here. I didn't hear a word that Angela said. If she could repeat that, please.
Please.
Thank you. So the recommendation to the board will be that staff conduct a thorough review of the communications policy and the social media policy, including the policy's purpose and scope, and to bring it to a future policy and development and review committee for feedback.
Okay, Vivian? Good. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? No, motion carries. Patricia, thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing the results. Good. So 7.2, direction requests, governance excellence initiative project procedure bylaw review. Now, we're running here to talk to us about that. So, well,
Thank you.
Turn it over to you.
Hello, Raylene Rehill. I'm a legislative coordinator here at the SLRD. This report is related to the Governance Excellence Initiative Project, and the purpose is to seek direction from the committee in order for staff to proceed with developing a draft procedure bylaw for consideration. So Chair, I'd just like to propose an approach to discussions after my report summary.
Okay.
As the purpose is to receive the information on the 9 direction requests listed in the report, you can see the table on page 15, the summary of committee direction request. I propose that I present and summarize each request briefly, one at a time, and then the committee could discuss and determine their direction before we move on to the next request. And during the committee's discussion, myself and Angela Belsham, corporate officer, are here to answer any questions.
Okay,
If that is approachable or acceptable, Chair, I could continue with my report summary, and that would support the discussions.
you gave us a page number there. I just want to make sure I've got the same pages as you.
Absolutely. In the report, page 15 does summarize all 9 of the direction requests.
Well, that doesn't match. In my page 15.
And next time, maybe put the summary at the top, so I don't go all the way through doing all the work and then find this beautiful table with the summary at the end. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I've got it, thank you. Are we comfortable with the approach that Raylene suggested? We are. I'm comfortable with it. So,
Thank you.
to you.
Okay, so continuing with the report summary, first quickly, I'd like to highlight that staff have only conducted a brief scan of other procedure bylaws at this stage. While there are many excellent examples to draw from out there, we found that some provisions begin to vary widely. So staff will proceed with more in-depth work for developing the actual draft procedure bylaw after receiving your direction today. In the board survey results, which were included in the report, you will see that the SLRD board identified the top 4 values to guide this procedure bylaw review as 1, integrity, 2, accountability, 3 was a tie for collaboration and transparency, and 4 is efficiency. All 8 guiding values from this specific survey will inform the review process, and you will see that they've been incorporated into today's staff report, allowing you to see where they overlap. But on that note, I'd like to highlight that there is a potential for conflict between some of the values. So for example, if we consider efficiency and transparency, efficiency in government meetings is about using time and resources effectively, making decisions promptly, and minimizing unnecessary complexity, where transparency is more about ensuring that that same decision-making process is appropriately accessible and easy for everyone to understand, including the public, which can sometimes require more time and or more resources. So in striving for efficiency, there may be unintended impacts to the value of transparency, just something to keep in mind. Another aspect that staff respectfully suggests the committee consider is how prescriptive would you like to see the SLRD procedure bylaw? A prescriptive bylaw can offer structure and consistency, and it creates a predictable environment and reduce procedural misunderstandings, which is crucial. However, if it becomes overly detailed, it may become complex, making it more difficult to follow.
Apologies, sorry.
Another potential drawback of a highly detailed bylaw is that it may limit the board or staff's ability to address a unique or an emerging situation that's not explicitly covered, whereas a less prescriptive approach can allow some flexibility. So the goal will be to strike the right balance here, providing enough structure to maintain order while avoiding unnecessary complexity. And we can discuss this further as you consider the direction requests. So in the report, you've seen that the board survey results indicate that most respondents rated the overall effectiveness of the bylaw as effective or very effective. It was a combined 80%, which is very good. And it does suggest that the bylaw is working and does not require a complete overhaul. However, the comments provided indicate that there's room for some improvements, including better organization, clarity, and a reduction in complexity. And so to address what was heard in the comments, the staff recommendations as outlined in the report focus on headings and subheadings, reordering and renumbering, simplified and modernized language, which will logically organize the document and ensure it's understandable and accessible, while the other recommendations relate to board procedural efficiencies and reducing that complexity, which supports the guiding values that the board identified as important to them. So again, as I mentioned, there's many excellent bylaw examples available to us, but a reminder that we'll be using our current bylaw since we heard that it's working. It's a great bylaw. We'll just plan to reorganize it and provide clarity in places. With that, staff do need the committee's direction on several key areas in order to move forward. And finally, the endorsed next step plan of this project is for staff to utilize the committee's direction received today and bring a draft bylaw to you at your April 5th meeting for review and comment. And then thereafter, staff would refine the draft bylaw as needed based on committee comments, the survey results, common practice, and of course, legislative requirements so that it can be brought to a future board meeting.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And if you'd like, I can start with the first direction request so you can begin your discussions.
Any questions at this point? I don't see any hands. Okay. Yep, let's proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, the first direction request was regarding election of chair, provisions 3.4 and 3.5, allowing nominated candidates to address the board pre-election. So several respondents commented here that nominated candidates should be provided an opportunity to address the board prior to an election. A brief scan of other regional district procedure bylaws shows that many include provisions allowing nominated candidates to address the board, with allotted speaking times ranging from 3 to 15 minutes. So staff are seeking direction whether the draft bylaw should introduce a provision allowing nominated candidates to address the board prior to an election.
Okay. Vivian,
Thank you. I believe that we should allow nominated candidates to speak about why they should be elected, but I think we should limit it to 3 minutes. Thank you.
good. Anyone else? Jenna?
I agree with Viv.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
I agree with Viv.
Oh, thank you. I just had a suggestion when I read that, saying we should allow them to speak. I wondered if we should require them to speak. Like if there are if there's more than one.
How about
Jen?
invite?
Jen?
I wouldn't want to get overly prescriptive with this. I think that I think it should we can leave a little gray in this space to allow for the moment.
Sure, okay. Now, do we need a resolution for each one of these things? So if we agree with this, then, oops, sorry, go ahead. Help me.
It's almost like noted, taking the direction and noted, so everything will be noted, and I just want to ensure that we don't get too prescribed. We're not writing these policies. We have some incredible professionals that will be doing it, and they'll be back in front of this group to review.
That's fine. So as we go through here, then we'll just sort of agree that we agree with that, but we'll have a resolution at the end. Yes? Yes, good. Okay, thank you. Number 2.
Number 2. This was regarding the election chair, the same provision regarding maximum consecutive terms and rotation between an electoral area director and a municipal director. One respondent commented on the need for consideration to limits to the number of times a board member can be consecutively elected, and that the chair should alternate between an electoral area director and a municipal director. A brief review of other regional district procedure bylaws did not reveal any such example of this provision. Staff are seeking direction whether the draft bylaw should introduce a provision stipulating a maximum consecutive term, and or if the positions should alternate between an electoral area director and a municipal director.
Interesting. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. And just I just want to flag, would like some direction on when we get into the prescriptive versus less prescriptive discussion. I won't get into that now. I have some thoughts. On this particular point, I do support the idea of term limits. And I think it's good for making sure that we're helping to develop skills in our leadership. Um, I think the piece of alternating between electoral area and municipal directors, I think it's personally too early for that decision or discussion. From my mind, legislatively, as I understand, the only difference between a municipal and electoral area director is how we get appointed to the board. And beyond that, any distinction is stuff that our board as a whole decides to make between these directors. And I think that's a discussion we've said we want to have, but we haven't had that discussion yet. In my mind, there are a lot of concerns and challenges, valid ones raised by directors, especially in electoral areas. Um, Creating a broader distinction, a wider distinction between two types of directors is one way to resolve that. But I think there may be other things we choose to do to resolve those issues. And again, I believe that's a discussion we still have to have. So I wouldn't want to go down the road just yet about requiring an alternation between electoral and municipal directors. I think that's a future discussion once we've dug a bit more into the roles and responsibilities discussion.
Thank you. Vivian,
Thank you. I think that we could, first of all, I think we should limit the terms. I think it should be a maximum of 2 terms, meaning 2 years. I think some alternating between candidates is healthy. I don't think we should force it to alternate between municipal and area directors, but maybe there could be some language that consideration should be given to alternating between municipal and area directors. I mean, it sort of depends on who the players are, and so I don't think we should force that. But also, there could be some language saying consideration should be given to north and south in terms of alternating positions of leadership on the board. Thank you.
Jenna,
Yeah, this is a really interesting one and one that I've been toying with for a while. I definitely don't think I'm supportive of adding prescriptive language around alternating between municipal or area directors. I feel like that's too prescriptive, and even alternating between north and south leadership. I think it's so dependent on who is around this table, and we just don't know who that's going to be in a few years' time. And I think for our procedures bylaw to define that does a disservice to future boards. I'm personally a supporter of term limits in lots of forms. For me, 2 years feels short. As we talk about continuity, the amount of time that it takes to build up the skills and the relationship with staff and with the CAO for a chair to then be moved on. So I think that there's a happy medium there. And if I think about kind of 4-year, like, I think we're a little bit unique in that we had a Jen started midterm last year or in the past term. So we're not actually on a 4-year cycle, but it could be a whole new board in 2 years. And so I think just defining what that term limit might be is challenging for me. At first, I was thinking like 6 years to give us like a ballpark on the other end, where visit 2, I was at 6, where it's like you could do a full 4 years and then partway through a second term, you then start to hand that off to somebody else. And I also just think that there's natural turnover, like we do an annual election either way. So if the board is really discontent or has challenges with the existing chair, there's ways to move that person out if need be. So I feel like it's less challenging than perhaps like a municipal setting where there's no way to move the chair on other than an election every 4 years. There's a bit more of a process around the board table. And so I think giving a longer term limit for me feels reasonable at this time. But those are my thoughts on term limits.
Anyone else? Did you look at other regional districts at all? Do you find others that have term limits for the chair?
We didn't specifically find one, but we did a very quick review. And so perhaps there is a provision out there in another organization, but we didn't have that to bring forward as an example at this time.
I have no idea what it's. I always thought, sorry.
Sorry, and I'd just like to speak to that as well. It is in the LGA that it is a requirement that elections occur on the first meeting in November. So while there could be like we do have to host those elections every November, like it is a requirement. So if it's more of this could be more of a governance conversation around how you're developing leadership within the organization. But again, we would still have to go through those elections every November. But it's more an internal consideration. And I do want to also note, this was brought up by only one individual in the survey. So that should be of consideration as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's interesting. So we are obliged to have an election each year. So we can't really say that we will have a 4-year term. We couldn't make that decision. You have a suggestion?
Oh, I just wanted to put a clarification that when we talk about terms, we're not talking about a length of term. We do have elections. So if there's concern on the board that a chair needs to change, there's an election every year to make that happen.
Okay.
And this is one comment. But what the question is, what is it addressing? Is it addressing a board electing a chair too often? What is it trying to, what problem are we trying to solve here? Because there is an election every year.
Yeah.
It always will be.
There always will be. Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to reflect on Director Stoner's comments about the length. And again, we're just talking about a max term. So nothing prevents us from electing a new chair each year. But I do think a term maximum generally, and I don't think I made the comment, maybe I did in the survey, but I am generally a strong proponent. I think it forces a board to really work on that succession and developing each other. I would sort of lean towards 4 years, maybe 6. Not hard set on that, and maybe sort of the length bears some discussion. But I for some of the reasons stated, I wouldn't be in short of like a 2-year term limit. I think there is a lot to learn and a lot of value of having some continuity, sort of balanced with that, making sure we are developing that leadership amongst ourselves and making sure that I think there is always a risk of a new old boys network as it always used to be, and I think it's a worthwhile protection against sort of entrenched sort of forever things. Yeah, thanks.
Jenna?
I've been on this board for a handful of years, but I don't have enough history. I am curious if, going back to CAO Paul's question of like, what problem are we trying to solve here? Have we ever had a board chair sit longer than 6 years? 4 years?
Not sure. Jen?
So Jack was the chair for the entire term of 2014 to 2018.
Yeah.
Prior to him, Patty Heinzman was the chair for 4 years.
Yeah.
And so, I've been 5 years.
Yeah.
And this is a conversation that, can get pretty personal pretty quickly. And so I will just say that I'm supportive of succession planning and sharing the knowledge and building the skills within other people on the board. I think that, a midterm review certainly makes some sense. And I think an annual election as dictated by the Local Government Act. I mean, there are other regional districts where the chair stayed the chair for 10 plus years. Look at some of our neighboring regional districts. And I don't think I think the conversation happens amongst board members in reviewing, the chair, reviewing the performance of the chair, reviewing the relationship of the board with the CAO. I think those are the conversations to be had. I think CODA, trying to put it into a policy to say that you must change the chair limits the. I think it just gets too prescriptive. So I'm certainly happy to have further reviews of how this works. And I think a future board may decide that they wish to have consistency, and that's up to that future board. It's not for us to say.
I just comment, if we're obliged to have an election each year, if we then put in aside from that, put in some kind of requirement that the chair can't sit for more than 2 years, then we're sort of subverting that election process, aren't we? We're going. It's not this. We're excluding somebody from consideration in the election. I'm not sure that that's that we should be doing that. We had, Jack was chair for 4 years. I was chair for 2 years, and clearly the board felt there should be a change after 2 years, and that happened. Where's the problem? If we are in a position where we think we should change the chair, but we're not actually changing because the chair ceases to be the chair at the end of the year, and then we need to elect a new chair. It could be the same person, could be a different person. And with regard to providing opportunities for leadership, there are a number of ways of doing that. I know of another regional district where their committee of the whole is chaired by somebody other than the chair of the board, and that rotates. So there's an opportunity for people to gain some experience. So we could have that kind of a conversation without it being personal at all. And I've been in leadership positions where it's been a strong part of the culture that we would provide opportunities for people that are not in leadership at that time to gain some experience and to learn and to try it out and so on. So I think we have an obligation there. But there are so many ways of doing it. So let's look at this. I'm going to suggest that based on comments, that we don't want this to happen. That we don't want to have a direction on maximum consecutive terms. But maybe I'm wrong. Vivian. And then Jenna.
Thank you. I just want to make it clear that this is not a conversation about individuals that we're having. It's a conversation about policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Jenna.
Thank you, through the chair. I don't know if I heard quite a strong consensus about not going in this direction. I do think it warrants some further discussion, and I've heard everything from 2 years to 6 years to no term limits. So given that staff are going to take this away, I wonder if they could just kind of leave a bit of a question mark there. Let us reflect on it a little bit more. And when this comes back for consideration, we can provide some more direction. I do think eventually this will have to go to the whole board. And I think this is going to be one of the sticking points. If we do decide to go forward with term limits, the board, that'll be a heavily discussed item. And so I'm just trying to figure out a way to move us forward today with direction and still provide some space to have that more fulsome conversation. Because I think to Viv's point, this isn't about individuals, this is about good governance. And while I appreciate that we do have to have an annual election, there's very good evidence out there that without term limits, then it often empowers the same people to hold leadership roles over time, and it doesn't actually create space for other people, even if the organization is trying to, and especially in small organizations like ours that can't compensate multiple people to try and step into leadership levels. There are financial barriers, equitable barriers, accessibility barriers to getting into those roles. And so from that point of consideration, I think it's worth considering from a governance perspective. But I don't know if we'll be able to get across the line on the conversation here today.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, much the same. And to be clear, for me, this is a broader policy. I have no concerns about where we are as a team. I really appreciate the team we have. I think this is a sort of bigger picture policy discussion for me. I do feel like, given the discussion, maybe the best next step is to just flag this as a thing that we need to take to the board next. Maybe before we start drafting the policy, this is a whole board discussion. It feels like one where there may be some really good different perspectives. And yeah, I think for me, I think I'd want to float this particular topic to the board.
Okay, thank you. Angela, how can we cover that in an omnibus resolution? We can, okay. Good, we've noted that, so unless anybody else has anything else to say, we'll move on to where are we?
Chair,
Number 3.
we're on number 3.
Number 3, yes.
This is regarding the agenda, chair review / notice to directors. It's provision 4.13. Timeframe for distribution of late agendas. So one respondent commented that distribution of the late agenda the day prior to the board meeting poses a challenge to review items thoroughly. A review of other procedure bylaw reveals a variety of procedures and associated timeframes for late items and late agendas. Some have no specified time frame, others were within 24 hours or the night before the meeting, while some only consider late items at the time of the meeting, so at the adoption of the agenda. The current procedure bylaw simply states that the corporate officer will prepare a late agenda as needed, and the current SLRD practice is to distribute late agendas by 3 p.m. the day prior to the meeting. So staff are seeking direction whether the draft bylaw should establish a time frame for distribution of late agendas that is different than the current non-prescriptive provision and the current practice.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any views on this?
Well, everything was.
No, apparently not. Oh, we do. Vivian and then Jen.
Thank you. When I'm scrambling to get a late request in, I'm really grateful for the 3 o'clock deadline before the meeting, but I really work hard to never do that. Partly out of respect for the other board members. I can't cope with the 3 p.m. the evening before the meeting review. I don't think it allows that people have, other lives, they have other commitments, they have other meetings, they have to travel, etc. I'd be okay with 24 hours prior. Those are just my working experience. So I'd like that 24 hours rather than 3 p.m. the day before. Thank you.
Chris and then Jen.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a hard one to know. It is a real challenge. A lot of us who are on municipal councils we're in council meetings often all day or at least all evening. And so getting stuff the day before, it is a real challenge to digest it. I recognize that meeting once a month, you can have a lot more sort of emergent things come up or where you can't reasonably wait till the next meeting. My perception, and maybe it's a misperception, is that there has been things which I'm not clear are so urgent. Again, maybe that's a misperception, and maybe there's an opportunity to tighten up what actually qualifies, and also sort of reflect that the request that stuff be put in to staff at least 10 days before, that's a newer thing that I think we're still working through a bit. And I don't know if I've experienced that enough, and maybe with a few more months under that sort of practice, things aren't as bad. So I guess I'm a little bit torn here. In general, I think it needs to be really urgent to come in that late for me. Like, I really like to hold true to the sort of 10-day idea in general, but so a little bit divided personally on this one.
Thank you. Jen?
Yeah, thank you. My comments have been reflected. I know that the area directors work really hard to get those things into us as soon as possible, and they're only putting things in that are that cannot wait. And so I think that practice is certainly respected, and so I'd say that we should carry on. I would, and I sort of would love to hear, and I do when I get the emails, but I think for the sake of the board's understanding of why an issue has come in a late package, that the area directors speak to why it has come late. And it's usually a 2-minute, or not even 2 minutes of, this just came to me, they need the money today, it can't wait. And I think that's fairly understandable. But it should also be understood by the rest of the board. So thank you.
Yeah, so Vivian, sorry.
Thank you. And maybe just along those lines, if it's determined that something is urgent enough to be a late addition, introducing it at the beginning of the meeting with an explanation, and then everyone has sort of the same amount of time to review it. I think, didn't we just do that at one of our meetings? Someone asked for some time to review it, and it could have been me. I just, and that was all right. But then we're all sort of in the same place in terms of preparation or lack thereof. I don't know.
My feeling is if it's a money issue, if it's somebody asking for a grant or something, I don't think that should be a late addition. I can't, we maybe need to tighten up our, in the electoral areas, our processes for people applying for funding. Nothing wrong with saying to somebody, it'll have to wait till next month. And if they get in, I'll stop there. This is an EAD discussion, maybe. Jenna.
Yeah, I think we can all just be mindful of the practice here. I think part of it's maybe an EAD discussion. I know stuff comes up with staff as well, and they have to get things on a late agenda item, just because the timing of getting the information into them, it happens. It's not ideal. I think everybody recognizes that. I don't think it's ideal for staff who are pulling an agenda together either. And so I think it's due diligence of the chair and the CAO to make sure that the threshold is being met, that it really is urgent. And I think our current practice works. Yeah, it's not ideal when you receive a big package at 3 p.m. If we need more time as a board, we can always ask for that on the day of the meeting to review the materials further before we go into the discussion and make sure we're as well informed as possible, and just hold a strong threshold as to what actually passes as urgent. But I think the 3 p.m. deadline, I do appreciate getting them a little bit before. Sometimes our practice at the District of Squamish is we get them on table, and then everybody takes a 10-minute break and we read through the material and then we talk about it. And that feels even more rushed than getting it at 3 p.m. the night before. And so whatever additional time we can get, I think is helpful. And if folks still need more time when we're around the table, then we just ask for that. But I think the current practice works well.
Okay. So number 3 says, to seeking direction on time frame for distribution of late agendas. So we agreed that we are satisfied with the way it is right now?
Yep, I can live with it.
Okay, then there you go, that's one. Number 4 is on the next page, seeking direction on directors' reports in the bylaw. Should the bylaw specifically address directors' reports?
Thank you. Can I give a little summary on
Yeah,
that?
please
Chair?
do.
Thank you. Okay, so there was lots of feedback in this section indicating that 2 provisions here seem challenging to understand and to manage. And 2 respondents commented that the notice of motion provisions are also an option provided for in the current bylaw. So staff's brief scan revealed that provisions in other organizations vary really widely here. So staff are seeking direction whether the draft bylaw should specifically address directors' reports, noting that directors' reports are not typically seen on board agendas, however, have been used as a mechanism to bring items to the board via the EAD committee. So the question is, would you like to continue this practice? If not, the current notice of motion provision can still provide for items that any director would like to bring forward that seems to be outside of the current work plan. In the review, staff did see in the District of Squamish's bylaw recently adopted a notice of motion provision that stipulates the councillor and the corporate officer in conjunction with the mayor determine a suitable meeting for that motion to be brought forward. At first glance, this seems similar to the SLRD's current practice related to directors' reports. However, staff will defer now to the committee for their discussion on it.
Thank you. Anyone? Chris?
Yeah, I guess I'm not fully clear on at this point, the purpose or the driver for a director's report in my sort of conception. If there's something where someone feels that the chair is not responding to what they feel is a legitimate topic, that's where a notice of motion comes in. And for stuff that the EAD committee feels important, I would expect it to be a referral from the EAD committee. And then we've also just talked about if there's an urgent issue, how that goes, and that goes through the chair. And so unless I'm missing something, the director's report seems like a sort of redundant thing trying to address some of the same challenges. So I'm not clear what problem it's meaning to solve.
Okay. I've never understood what a director's report is. I've been writing them for 10 years, but never really, not really clear where they fit.
I have a glimmer.
Yeah.
I think it's a way to preserve documentation and a record and make it clear what's intended, what the request is, where it's coming from, what the background is, why the board should spend time on this item and what you're asking for. So sometimes I feel like they're a bit redundant, but that's only because I know exactly what I want, like, so, all right, then here it is. And I think it's more to do with completing records and having documentation, as well as for the edification of board members that aren't familiar with the issue. Am I missing something here?
Have we used them at the board meetings?
Yes. Frequently.
Yeah.
Funding request, PILT, for example, Director Rainbow or Chair Rainbow or Tony.
Yeah. Angela's just wants to make a quick comment.
So thank you. Well, I can't speak to the history as to why we have it embedded in our procedure bylaw. I can speak to what we've seen over the past kind of year and a half as far as directors' reports are concerned. And we do see them come through EAD committee quite frequently in regards to projects, often sometimes funding, like PILT funds that need to flow through the EAD and be recommended to the board. Typically for funding, that comes through as communications for action coming directly from a nonprofit. But if there's advocacy required, sometimes that comes through a director's report as well to the board. So I personally haven't seen them come through the board that much, but certainly the electoral area director committee, we do see directors' reports quite frequently. As it's stated in the procedures bylaws, it provides a provision where any director may place an item of business on the agenda for a regular meeting by given written notice of the item in reasonable detail. And that's what those directors' reports have been.
Okay. Jenna,
And this might be, I think this is a question due to staff. How does that differ from a notice of motion?
And that is a very good question, Director Stoner. And it was an interesting piece because when we started looking at other procedure bylaws, we could not find another procedure bylaw out there that specifically referred to directors' reports. They were using notice of motion in order to get these items on an agenda. And so I'm afraid I can't speak to the history as to why originally this was needed in the SLRD's procedure bylaw, but I'm sure there was a problem that needed to be solved, and this was a way in which we could do so. And as Ms. Rehill mentioned, we were quite struck by the recent update of the District of Squamish's procedure bylaw, because it seemed to address that communication with the CAO and the corporate officer around getting something on an agenda through a notice of motion process. So I think those two are sort of interchangeable as far as we could see when we were doing our review. And that's why we wanted to bring it to this committee, because it did come up in the survey, and thought it would be a good conversation for us to have here at this table as to how you would like us to move forward, whether we get a bit more prescriptive around directors' reports, or we simply look at that notice of motion as a way of getting items on, but perhaps embedding some detail around the collaboration with the CAO and the corporate officer and that director to make sure that it aligns as far as timing is concerned, particularly if it's time sensitive.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. In general, I never really understood the context of directors' reports, although I appreciate Vivian's context of like, it's helpful to have the history and the background and that being documented. And if that is an item that is kind of cyclical in nature, whether it's funding or kind of business as usual, I would expect that just to come up through the EAD anyways. Whereas if a board member is having a hard time getting something on the agenda that's outside of existing staff work plans, they think is an emergent issue that needs immediate time, then that to me should be a notice of motion. And then the board can decide how they want to move that work forward and what they want to drop or what they want to direct staff to drop in order to get that work done if that's seen as a higher priority. But for me, just bringing forward directors' reports has been challenging sitting at the board. So I'd be happy to drop that and change our practices a little bit.
Chris.
Yeah, just reflecting on the conversation, it sort of strikes me that directors' reports have maybe conflated two distinct concepts. And the one is, how does something, whatever it is, get on the agenda? And I think we've got notice of motion, we've got the chair putting it there or flowing through the EAD committee. So to my mind, that problem is solved and we don't need directors' reports for that. The other piece, though, that I think I've heard is there's a question of sometimes a director has the background information for a decision, regardless how it gets on the agenda. And so maybe drawing that distinction, whereas right now it's sort of been conflated of like the director is the source of the information and wants it on the agenda. I think those are two separate things which we should keep separate. And I don't know that we actually need something special in the procedures bylaw. I think if staff feels that the director is the best source of background information, staff can ask the director for that background information. And again, I think getting it on the agenda, whether it's via the chair or the notice of motion, I think that's we've got things that address that.
Okay. So we are leaning towards then, by the sound of it, that this bylaw shouldn't specifically address directors' reports. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have any further comments? Raylene, was that discussion clear to you?
Thank you.
It was? Good. Okay, good, we'll move along. And no, where is it? Where's number 5? I can't remember. Oh, it is page 10. Lunch break provision.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, there were comments in this section of the survey addressing the level of detail required in this provision, and 2 respondents commented that the board should consistently adhere to stretching and lunch breaks with consideration of a 45-minute lunch break. So staff provided comment in the report addressing the level of detail in the bylaw regarding convening and adjourning. And after a brief scan of other procedure bylaws, staff suggests that the provision stipulating a specific regular meeting convene time be maintained in the bylaw, as it upholds the board's guiding values of transparency and efficiency. Further, that provision ensures that everyone, especially the public, will have a clear understanding of when business will begin, encouraging public engagement. Staff also provided comments in the report regarding the lunch break. A brief scan of other procedure bylaws showed it is not common practice to stipulate a lunch break. And again, another example was not found regarding this specifically. So staff are seeking direction to either remove the provision regarding lunch break, maintain the provision, and or update the length of the lunch break provision.
Okay. Comments?
Yeah,
First
I
of all,
do.
Angela.
Thank you so much. Through the chair, just one clarity, within the procedure bylaw as we have it written, it says adjourn at or near 12:30 p.m. for a lunch break and reconvene at or near 1 p.m. So is providing some flexibility around that time limit as it states right now in the procedure bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Comments? Vivian?
I'm totally fine with that. And I think that leaves the chair some discretion to move it forward or possibly even extend it. But depending on how the meeting's going, I think it's working fine the way it is. And that pretty much does give the public at least a ballpark of when the meeting will be adjourned at lunchtime.
Okay, I see we have another board member just joined us, a committee member. Come on, Jenna, who's there with you? I just saw the top of her head. There we go. Good. Thank you. Does she have anything to say? Is that a he?
Free to keep the provision as written with a little bit of flexibility for the chair and the board to decide when lunch should be. But I actually really appreciate having it written out in our procedure bylaw. I do think it provides some consistency and expectation for the public, especially given that we know that folks are tuning in online. So yeah, I'm happy to keep it as it.
Yeah, thank you. Jen and then Chris.
Thank you, Chair. My reason for wanting a little flexibility is that there's nothing worse than being in the middle of a really productive conversation and having to cut it off because of the time on the clock. further the back and forth from agenda to agenda, and we have to stop this, we have to start this, we have to go back to this, makes it incredibly confusing to follow. And so I think for the sake of the public, having some flexibility to not stop and start and restart and pause this and go there, and especially for the recording of the meeting, being able to have a clear flow, and being able to delineate through sort of meeting minutes after the fact to say this is where the conversation went and this is when it was paused, or being able to finish the conversation, put it to bed and move on to the next thing, and not being tied to 12:30 start time or finish time. I get the reasons for having defined start times, but it is incredibly difficult to chair a meeting when you're tied to stopping and starting a conversation. So I appreciate the flexibility, and this has been a good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd prefer to keep it as is, but reflecting on the chair's comments, you know, if someone is going to speak, we generally do have a timed delegation sort of separate from this. And I think, you know, now we're in a time where everything is recorded, anyone can go back and watch it. And so from that perspective, it's maybe not so unreasonable that we can be flexible and we have that transparency, because again, you can always go to YouTube and watch it when your schedule fits. So I actually am warming to the idea of more flexibility there. And I just, as a side note, I think it might be worthwhile to have a policy around stretch breaks and so on. But in my mind, that's something that does better as a policy and sort of for the board to have some guidance to hold ourselves accountable. But I wouldn't want that piece in a bylaw about the stretch breaks.
You? Jenna?
Can I just clarify perhaps, Jen, your comment? So we heard from our corporate officer that our current language does have some flexibility around the 12:30 mark for lunch. And then in tandem with later in this report, we're talking about bringing the delegations to the start of the meeting. And so that relieves some of the pressure for the 1 p.m. return. Does that feel like that provides us enough wiggle room to not cut off conversations, or do we still want to provide more flexibility in the bylaw than the I can't remember what the exact wording is, but is it around 12:30 or close? There's some wiggle room in the wording of the bylaw is what I heard, and I'm curious if that is sufficient.
Yeah, I can restate that. Currently, it reads as adjourn at or near 12:30 p.m. for a lunch break and reconvene at or near 1 p.m.
Yeah, the only time I have a problem with this is where if at or near 12:30 gets to be 20 to 1 and we have a delegation at 1, then that's really a bit of a rush. But I think we're looking at delegations as a separate item, so maybe keep that in mind. What about the suggestion that we take 45 minutes for lunch? We're set at 30 minutes there, give or take. Do we want to extend? Do we want to have a longer lunch break? That's all, Vivian and then Jen. Vivian?
Thank you. I'm just so very happy with the 5-minute breaks. I think that's where we could use that extra little bit of time and leave the lunch at half an hour max.
Jen?
Yeah, I think that the regular stretch breaks are more important than a longer lunch, because our days are long enough, and because lunch is provided to us, it can very easily be consumed quickly. if we were going out or having to go off-site to pick up lunch, then 45 minutes would make sense. But I think that the sooner we can, carry on the business and get people on their road on the way home. And I just don't want to be so prescriptive in our language in the policy. It becomes handcuffs. As we've seen, we often talk about because people are tuning in. Well, for the sake of the people tuning in, we want to keep the business rolling so that we can get on with it. So I don't want to, and frankly, having the flexibility to extend the lunch if it's something that we need a bit more time or we have a looser schedule for the day. And to your point, Tony, about the delegations starting at 1 o'clock, that's precisely why I've asked for the delegations to move to a different time so that they're not being jammed in the middle of something. Thank you.
So, do we want to remove this language from this policy altogether? That we make no reference to start and finish times for lunch? Jen?
I'd be in favor of not having time conversation in a policy except for start times. As in the morning starts at X, because it allows for the conversation to be wholesome and to be planned through the agenda. The agenda is where the timing should be set out. I don't think it should live in the policy other than the day of the week and the time that the day starts. That would be my motion if someone wanted to consider a motion.
Do we need a motion? No, we don't need a motion. So we would, with regard to the direction that's being looked for number 5, our direction would be that we remove from the policy any reference to start and finish times for lunch break. Have I got general agreement on that? I see some heads nodding. Okay. Is that good for you?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
So,
we are getting there. We're on number 6.
number 6.
Regarding order of business, convene and adjourn again, 4.22, and 2 comments from committee members. This was about reordering the regular agenda business for delegations and time staff reports. So we did have that comment that would like to see them brought forward. Staff are seeking direction on an update to reordering the delegations and time staff reports to be heard near the start of regular business. This would be prior to a closed meeting session, as the duration of the closed meeting sessions are also unpredictable. Going back to the values, there are 2 values at play in this direction request. The change would enhance efficiency by making the scheduling of delegations before a meeting much more efficient, and also during the meeting, reduce the potential of jumping between agenda items, as was said, and also supports transparency by clearly outlining to delegations and to the public when they would be heard. We would know that before the meeting and also during the meeting.
Good, thank you. Jenna?
Thank you. I think this makes good sense for delegations. Can staff give me an example of what a timed staff report would be? And I'm just curious about the interplay there between a closed meeting and a timed staff report. Sometimes there's connections.
Thank you. Through the chair, they're not very common. We were trying to decide how many, perhaps maybe 6 or 7 per year, the board might see a staffed timed report. Often, if a staff member also has a contractor that is attending with them to make a presentation or such, we would schedule that report for the staff member. So the contractor, we would make the most effective use of their time and provide them a specific time. Again, we would sometimes see delegations and then a timed staff report throughout the day. If we did see those in the morning prior to the closed session, then the unpredictable nature of the length of a closed session could continue. The meeting perhaps would reopen, and then the business would then continue for the day. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I see Jenna nodding. Chris?
Yeah, I support this idea. The one thing is just to be, in my mind, careful in our language to give us the flexibility. If there's some legal background that we need to receive enclosed, for example, before a delegation or something, that we still have the ability within our procedures bylaw to do that piece. But in general, getting the delegations first and so on makes sense.
If I may, if we said they had to be at the beginning, then that might, the comment Chris made could be problematic. Maybe we don't want delegations to be at 1 o'clock. If we had one that was going to be later at 2 o'clock or something like that, if we had to, generally speaking, we want to start the day with it. But if our language is too prescriptive, then we don't have the opportunity to have one later if it's necessary. It could be necessary. Heather.
I just want to have a point of clarification of that curiosity of why are closed meetings first? And I think Director Pettingill really talked about it there, where closed meetings are often put first because legal consult or other things inform the presentation that's happening in open or anything else that's happening in open. So something to be taken into consideration is that flexibility, and then noting if you do move it to, if you do say, well, if we have to talk about it first and close, we'll make it 1 o'clock, then it does kind of send an indicator of what you're talking about in close. But I mean, lots of people can, there's no confirmation of that. And sometimes it's about the availability of the delegation. So it's just that, just to clarify why we put close first is because of that.
Okay. Okay, rating.
If I may offer, Chair, there is also a current provision in the bylaw that stipulates any change to the prescribed order of business of a meeting may be approved by the board by a simple majority vote. So that flexibility is there, and we do see that in our regular practice when we do need to switch things around. So we would say maintain that flexibility there with that provision.
Okay. Any other comments here? Are we clear on what I'm not quite clear on what our direction is right now, but Jenna.
Never mind. I was just trying to figure out if we actually needed to set a time, but I appreciate this is the order of the agenda. So my general thought is that we reorder it according to putting delegations and time staff reports first, and then if need be, the chair and the CAO can amend the agenda that month if they think that there's a different order that's necessary. But I do really like the idea of bringing the timed item up so that we can relieve the rest of the day.
And then Heather, how do you feel about this? What language would you like here?
If I can clarify, I think there's two options on the table, well, three, I guess, but two options being discussed here. One of them, which is what Ms. Rayhill pointed out, which is the overall direction of the board that delegations take place in the morning. That still is, that already is in the procedure bylaws and allows for that there is flexibility already allowed in the procedure bylaws. So do we need to be specific in the bylaws to put?
Okay, so what you're saying then is that if somebody wants to be a delegation right now, you could say to them yes, and you're on at
9 a.m.
Right, whatever. Yeah, you could. Okay. And if they can't make it, it's negotiable. What do we say you have to make it? It depends. Some of the presentation we have for people like Hydro and Fortis and people like that, it shouldn't matter to them what time of day it is. So, okay, Vivian.
Thank you. The sort of more recent change of actually trying to corral these delegations into staying in their allocated time has been very helpful. That's sort of one thing. I was wanting to ask, when we put the message up on the board, I guess this is a question for staff. Can we indicate that, the meeting is closed for lunch, resuming at 1 p.m. or 1:30, or could we do that? And have we considered moving the close to farther along in the agenda? That is certainly the wild card in terms of time, I think, for the chair. That's a very important work that goes on in closed. I was just at another meeting, and last evening, all of the regular business was done, and then they went into closed. And so could we even consider that as a different way to approach business? Certainly for the listening public, that would be better. As far as the delegations go, I like them earlier in the day and limited to their amount of time, and the close to follow later. I think that works better in general.
Another question, do we need to change the language that's in the policy right now? I'm hearing that the chair has the flexibility. Really?
Thank you, Chair. So in the procedure bylaw, the order of regular business would be noted. The agenda would have to be prepared in adherence to the procedure bylaw. The provision that allows the flexibility is at a majority vote of the board on the day of the meeting. So since we're doing this review right now, we could look at reordering and then noting in the bylaw the regular order of business. And at any time, if the order of business needed to be changed, we could consider that at the meeting.
Thank you. That makes it a lot clearer.
But as the bylaw is currently written,
Yeah.
it does have delegations 1 p.m.
Okay. So I think what I've heard just there then is that we should remove that 1 p.m. thing from the bylaw and word it in such a way that the order is generally that delegations would come first, and there's language in there to allow for a change if necessary. Okay. What do you all think of that? Is that very clear? Yes? We're all nodding. We're okay. We'll move on.
Thank you.
Thank you. So number 7.
Yes, and actually, Chair, I'd like to propose that 7, 8, and 9 requests are considered together because they all relate to introducing speaking times.
Okay,
So if I could just provide a short summary of these direction requests.
please do. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so the survey sections pertaining to rules of order, motions, and debate. Comments came up that speaking time limits might be helpful. Staff in their brief scan saw a lot of variation here in other procedure bylaws. So if an organization had speaking time limits, they were typically incorporated into motions and debate provisions, where the rules of order more typically outline, as it does in ours, how directors should speak when addressing each other, not interrupt each other, etc. So here is a place where we can be mindful of balancing how prescriptive we'd like to be. Perhaps you should consider what the board and the committee chairs are currently doing. Is this practice working well? Would this committee suggest adding the practice into the bylaw so that it's required? And how prescriptive would you like it to be? So keep in mind that the chair or the presiding member is responsible for applying the procedure bylaw. They would need to track, for example, how many times each director speaks or for how long. If those details are in a procedure bylaw, the boards and the committees are required to do it that way. So staff are seeking direction on introduction of speaking times within the bylaw. Is this something that you'd like to consider provisions pertaining to motions and debate?
Thank you. Jenna?
Thank you, through the chair. This is one that I think is really valuable in being a little bit more prescriptive. Our bylaw does refer to Robert's Rules of Order. Knowing that that's not something that most of us have read or are super familiar with, I think being more clear in our procedure bylaw is important so that everybody understands what the rules of debate are. I think that's how we set fair, reasonable, respectful debate. And when things get heated, people know what the boundaries are and they don't feel like they're being singled out for being cut off. And so for me, I think it's important to be clear on our rules of order, who speaks first. So typically that's the person who has put the motion on the floor. The seconder gets to speak second. I think speaking time limits are helpful. They can be 3 or 5 minutes, I think is fair. And then an option to go back around if people have additional comments. But hearing from everybody first, at least once, so that everybody has a chance to speak. I think to me, that is, if we outline that in our procedure bylaw, then that is what everybody knows what to expect. I'm happy to talk about the details of that. If people feel like it should be 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to speak, I'm open. I just would appreciate more clarity in our procedure bylaw personally.
Thank you. Vivian?
Completely support everything that Jenna just said. And I lean towards the 3-minute time limit. Thank you.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, two things. And when it comes to delegations, I think I'm more comfortable in being pretty hard edged about what the limits are. But I do think there needs to be some discretion of the chair when it's appropriate for delegation to have more time. So just making sure we have that sort of language. I also, as a general idea, I'm really supportive of speaking limits for directors. I think with the size of our board, that's really important, but also reflect having seen not just our organization, but others, but maybe right now, especially ours, our sort of self-control or self-policing to stay with those limits can be and likely will be for a little bit challenging while we try and introduce that. So just wanting to make sure, and I'm not clear on this, but as we wrestle through time limits, making sure that if someone does extend beyond, it doesn't compromise the procedural fairness and therefore put a vote into question. So just making sure that we're sort of staying on side that way. But as long as we can do that, I think having those limits explicitly stated in this case does make sense.
Okay.
I just have a question for somebody. Who monitors the timing? I start speaking at a board meeting, okay? And I have a tendency to ramble on, and as I'm rambling on there, who is it that says time? You've had 5 minutes.
That would be a job for sure.
That's the chair.
You can't ask the chair to do it. I don't think
That's
you
their
can
job.
anyway. It's the chair's job to have a clock. Okay, so right. That's my answer. The chair does it. So we've got 3 things here: 7, 8, and 9. I guess what do we want to tell staff here? Do we want to have time limits? Want them to come back with some suggested time limits and Jenna? And
I
then
think I've
Jen?
heard general support for outlining some time limits. My general recommendation is 5 minutes for the person who's moved the motion and then 3 minutes for subsequent speakers. And then people get 2 rounds of comment.
2 rounds of comments? Okay, Jen?
Yes, I agree with those limits. And I think that it's good practice for us to limit, with room for extension if an item warrants more discussion, but to limit topics. So not just each person speaking, but to limit the topics because we can get very circular. And that requires, each individual disciplining themselves to, if you can't think of what you want to say in 8 words or less and write them down, then, coming prepared to a meeting and being prepared with the comments you wish to make or ask the questions, but then limiting the entire topic, because often we'll spend a lot of time on very small decisions and not a lot of time on very large decisions, or vice versa. And so I think being able to limit those discussions gives clarity to board members as well as the public as to how long we're going to talk about something.
Okay, thank you. Jenna?
And I just want to clarify that for me, this is time limits once a motion is on the floor. So if you can, we can ask as many questions of staff clarifying once an item is on the floor. But once a motion is on the floor, I think it is important for us as a board to be really clear about how we handle debate.
Okay. Any further comment? Vivian? And then Chris.
So I really kind of like the way this is going, and I think and it should be possibly reviewed or give a quick refresher at the beginning of the year, especially for new board members, about this is how we are doing business. And that might help facilitate a more efficient discussion at the table. It's just a thought.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, just reflecting on something Director Ford raised. I wouldn't want to be in a situation where we have to have a motion to extend a particular topic, but I do think having a sense of how long we intend to spend on this topic. I know at District of Squamish, it's generally not in the public agendas, but in the agendas we see there is a start and end time, which is our targets for each topic. It might be more challenging at the regional district given the length of our agendas and the number of topics, but I do find personally, in terms of moderating myself, having that start and end target for each agenda item is really helpful. And so I'm not sure if others feel that's a useful sort of step in the right direction in terms of constraining how long we go on each topic.
Okay, thank you. Your hand's still up, Chris. Is that another comment?
No, I've got another call coming in on my phone, which I'm trying to ignore, and it's changed on my screen, so I'll try and get it down.
There we go. Okay. Rainey, are you comfortable with proceeding? You have enough information from us? Good. Anything else from the committee? Okay. So that's, I believe that's it, isn't it, Rainey?
That was the last of the direction requests. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
I think I'll defer to Angela now for recommendation.
Thank you.
Please.
So I have based on the conversation that's happened at the table, there's an opportunity to bring possibly 2 resolutions to the board to address the discussion. First off, that it be recommended to the regional board that staff bring back to a future policy development and review committee a draft procedures bylaw that includes provisions legislatively required for regional districts, addresses the staff recommendations as outlined in the staff report, and incorporates the comments and feedback as provided by the committee in relation to elections, distribution of late agendas, directors' reports, lunch breaks, and speaking times. So that would be the first resolution that would be considered by the committee. The second one that I've drafted is that it be recommended to the regional board that maximum term limits for board chairs be considered as an addition to the procedure bylaw. And this is a way to maybe bring that discussion to the board, providing a little bit more time for the committee members to think about that prior to it coming to the February board meeting for a bigger discussion.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't one of the items in the list of 10, but in reading the report, I got the sense that there and maybe it's just one person, but some lack of clarity about how things get on the agenda or how that happens. For me, I have a fairly clear understanding that the chair puts things on the agenda and then the board has the option to approve or amend the agenda. Just want to sort of understand if that is something we need to address or clarify. Again, it was fairly clear for me, but from the feedback in the survey, it didn't seem that everyone was on board there. So just a question, do we need more clarity there? Or are we good there?
Any thoughts from anybody else on that?
Chair.
Jenna?
Appreciate Director Pettingill raising it. To me, that's not something that sits in a procedure bylaw. It's part of our orientation. It's part of how the board works together. So I'd be okay not putting language in the procedure bylaw accordingly, because that may vary council or board to board.
Vivian?
Thank you. I was jumping to another topic, if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just, I want to make sure that we're going to eliminate the use of the language of clear days and substitute that for business days. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. I think one of the things that did come up throughout was the need for clear language, and that was definitely identified and was incorporated as part of the staff recommendations to ensure that the draft that comes to you addresses that.
Okay. So we have two resolutions that Angela has suggested for us that covers what we've discussed this morning. If we're comfortable, let's take them one at a time. If you're comfortable with the first one, can I have somebody move it? Would you like it reread? Please, say this is resolution number 1.
That it be recommended to the regional board that staff bring back to a future policy development and review committee a draft procedures bylaw that includes provisions legislatively required for regional districts, addresses the staff recommendations as outlined in the report, and incorporates the comments and feedback as provided by the committee in relation to elections, distribution of late agendas, directors' reports, lunch breaks, and speaking times.
Jenna?
Has that been moved?
No, I'm looking for that's the suggestion for resolution number 1.
I'll move that.
Move Jenna, second please by Jen. Any questions or comments? Jenna?
Just briefly, I'll say thanks for the work and thanks to my fellow board members for providing feedback to the survey. I think this is a really helpful and important piece of work. And this has been a really productive way to frame the conversation. So thank you to staff. Look forward to the draft bylaw when it comes forward.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, just a question on process. This feels to me to be a little more substantial in terms of changes the committee is recommending and sort of discussion we've had and so on. So just wanting to understand or clarify that there will be a report to the board, sort of summarize the discussion. I guess of course, the board is always free to add thoughts and so on. This is just a recommendation, but just wondering how we sort of don't end up rehashing the whole discussion. I'm assuming it's a board report summarizing this discussion we've had, but just looking for some clarity there.
Yes, I think, my answer is yes. Is it raining?
I'm happy to
Angela?
speak to that. Yeah, so typically what happens from our committees is this report will flow through to the board with this report and a cover page. The cover page will have the resolutions from the committee, and often when there's really fulsome conversation that has led to those resolutions, we'll add some background. What I would suggest in this case is also providing the link to the live stream of this meeting so that any of those board members can also go back if they're needing a little bit more information on how we arrived at the resolutions today.
Great, thank you. Chris, does that answer your question? It does.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? If not, Vivian?
Just to thank staff and apologize because a couple of the comments I made, you'd covered very well in the background report. I just had been making notes as I was going along and so, yeah, apologies for bringing up things that you'd already covered and made good recommendations on in the report. I didn't see them all right off the bat, and so I was screening backwards. It's one way to approach things. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call a question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And we have a second resolution suggested. So if you could read that, please, Angela.
That it be recommended to the regional board that maximum term limits for board chair be considered as an addition to the procedure bylaw.
Jenny, you'd like to move that? Thank you. Vivian, you're seconding it? Second. Okay. Any comments? Okay, I guess we're talked out on that one, so no comments there. I will ask, call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Well, thank you. So not bad timing. That brings us to number 8, decision on late business. Do we have any late business? I don't have any late business. Anybody want no suggestions for late business? Very good. Staff, Patricia and Bailey, thank you very much for your, thank you. Okay, no late business, so it gets to number 10, which on my agenda says adjournment. Moved by Jen, seconded by Jenna. I don't see anybody opposed, so this meeting is adjourned.